Hearty shalom to all of you. Jeffrey Seif here. Glad to take a look at the book with you, the Tree of Life version of the Bible. We're looking at a portion beginning in Deuteronomy chapter 21, verse 10, that is absolutely fascinating. Instead of 10 minutes, I wish I had 10 hours because there's a string of pearls here. Everything is fascinating. Of course, you take a look at the book, in the Bible itself is just, it's fascinating to be sure. But here, I just want to muse around a little bit and land to give you some sense of the issues at play. In chapter 21, picking up verse 10, he starts off, when you go out to war against your enemies, and the Lord your God hands them over to you, and you take them captive, suppose you see among the captives a beautiful woman, and you desire her, and it goes on. This is a leap back into another world, where armies went out to war, they were successful, they took back booty and plunder. People today say, well, we got to follow the commandments, and, but it's a different kind of world. It goes on to say then in verse 18, suppose a man has a stubborn son who refuses to listen to father and mother. When you follow through the story, it goes on to verse 21, then you're to take him to the city gate and stone him. We don't live in this world. In chapter 22, verse 1, suppose you see your brother's ox or sheep go astray, you're not to ignore them. This is an agrarian culture. It's a different world. Occasionally we find things that can relate to us. In verse 5 of the 22nd chapter, a man's gear is not to be on a woman, nor a man to wear women's clothing. I mean, they're mentioned wear women's clothing, women and men. We're looking here at what was established for Israel. And there were penalties imposed for violating these statutes. Now, we don't live in this ancient agrarian world today, and we live in a democracy, not a theocracy, where, truth be known, our culture is influenced by biblical value, but it's not tethered to it exclusively. We live in a world where everyone has life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. According to the dictates of their conscience, they can follow a religion or no religion. That's not what we're looking at here. We're looking at a theocracy. This is the way it's spelled out, and it's imposed upon Hebrew people. Today, we accept the yoke of the kingdom voluntarily. There is no imposition. People are free to follow the dictates of their conscience, but that's not what we're looking at here in the TLV Bible or any else, or any other version of the Bible. So it begs the question then, to what extent is the biblical text appropriate for today? I think it's a reasonable question. I'll answer it, picking up, and I'm just making my way through some of these things in chapter 22, verse 8. When you build a new house, you're to make sure there's a guardrail around the roof. These flat roofs had to have a little fencing that extended upward because people were at the top of the house in antiquity. It's hot, and you want to make sure people don't fall off. There's a responsibility to build it in a way that looks out for your those who might fall off, for your brother's interest, a visitor or a child. You're looking here at biblical literature that informs building code. We don't live in that world today. We have these codes, but the Bible deals with everything from agricultural laws to building laws to health laws, etc. Suppose a man takes a wife and goes into her, it says in verse 13 of chapter 22, and he finds something undesirable. Now we're looking at civil law. We're looking at divorce issues. And there are a variety of things that play with all that. When you go to chapter 23, let's say I'm just dancing around here in verse 16. You are not to hand over to his master a slave who seeks refuge with you from his master. We don't live in this world today that we're supposed to give quarter here according to slaves. Of course, Hebrews remembering that once we were mistreated slaves ourselves. Moving on, it talks about extending loans to your brothers, not to employ excessive interest. In verse 20, you move on to toward the end of it in verse 25, when you come into your neighbor's vineyard, you may eat your fruit. You may eat your fill of grapes, but you were not to put any in your basket. I want to spend some time on that, and I could go on, continue rummaging through the passage, the weekly reading. I want to camp here for a second when I think of all the controversy today, are we under the law? Do we need to follow the mandates of the Torah? Some say, yes, we have to. I say we can't. And the reason why we can't isn't because we can't be pious enough. The reason why we can't is we don't live in that world. We're in a different social contract here in America it's a different set of circumstances. When the New Testament says you can't live out the Torah, you can't follow the Torah, it's not to disparage it, it's just reality. It's not our world. Today when people say, we've got to, if you want to follow Jesus, we got to keep the commandments. Jesus said, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments, and that means you have to follow the Old Testament law. It's nonsense. That there's no way to follow it. What there is a way to do is to look at it and extract from it Spirit-inspired principles to live by. Thus, we live not by the letter of the law, but by the spirit of the law. That we can do and should do and must do. And I'll just give you an example of it. And by the way, I could land on any one of these. That's why I wish I had 10 hours, not 10 minutes. But just something that seems prima facie insignificant. The last one I looked at, when you come into your neighbor's vineyard, you may eat your fill of grapes, but you were not to put any in your basket. If you look at the Old Testament world, there were provisions made for the poor, that God is construed as the ultimate landowner. It's his land. He promised it to Hebrews to steward it. But there's a sense in which your family might own the land, but you're stewarding that which is ultimately his. And he brought you to the land, and he's the one who gives you success in the land. And in return for that, there's a kind of grace that we are to extend to those in need. And those that are in need are not to take advantage of us in extending the grace to us. This is kind of like you can have welfare to help people get going, but for some people, they just tap into it and make it a way of living. They get socialized into just relying on others. I mention this here because here you have a farmer and a Hebrew who falls upon hard times can go through and with his hands. He says, when you come into your neighbor's vineyard, you can eat grapes, but you can't put them in your basket. In other words, there's something in there, you can sustain yourself with it, but you can't seize his assets. That is, even in taking benefit from the Torah, you find yourself upon hard times, you have a need. Yes, your brother is duty-bound to assist you, to allow you to take what you can eat, but you can't carry off his crop. There's an ethical responsibility even on the poor. How are they to perform in that they are being extended this kind of grace? Funny, that's never talked about today because that's not politically correct. And I think it's worth some reflection. And by that I mean we as a culture or congregations extend grace to individuals. There can be member care, people that fall upon hard times, and we could and we should and we must extend ourselves a hand. But there's obligations upon those that are receiving it. That is to say, to not take too much, not to take too long, with an understanding that they're to be getting about their business of getting up with their own feet, not forever laying down. It's like Yeshua, Jesus. There was a man who was paralyzed for many years in the Gospel of John. He said to the guy, do you want to be healed? It sounds like a dumb question. Truth of the matter is a lot of people just like laying around sick and despondent and depressed and not doing anything with their life. Do you want to get better? Yeah, okay, well then rise, take up your pallet and walk. Get up and go. Short-term help, yes, but there's an obligation for individuals to be proactive and to move forward in life. Hey, listen, there's so much stuff in the book. I don't even know I've done justice to this little section that I wanted to land on. Never mind all of it, but I wanted to let you see with me how fascinating it is in so many ways. Remember the point. Here's the takeaway from all this. When you read the Hebrew Bible, we don't live under this economy. It's a different culture, but we extract principles from it. And we want the Lord to guide us as we look to ask the question, what can we derive from this? First, we want to understand a text in the context of its own culture. We want to take a look at the book. We want to come to terms with that and then derive principles from it. There's really no way to live it out literally. Blessings to you. See you again next week, same time, same station. Jeffrey Seif here, signing out. God bless.